Every day something escapes us. If you are curious to find out how, stay with us. Marco lived immersed in the chaos of the city, in a world dominated by skyscrapers of glass and concrete that towered over him like silent giants. The frenetic pace of Milan had always fascinated him. The lights, the possibilities, the promise of success. And yet, something in him had broken. For some time, a feeling of growing emptiness had oppressed him, making each day increasingly similar to the previous one. He would wake up to the piercing sound of his phone, immediately check his notifications, and immerse himself in a whirlwind of emails and online meetings, as if there was no other way to live. If this sounds like you, subscribe to our channel for more stories that can inspire you to change. But one day, something happened that made him stop. While he was at his mother's funeral, watching the coffin descend into the earth, Marco felt for the first time in years a deep silence, an inner emptiness that overwhelmed him. He could no longer pretend that his life was okay. The death of his mother, his only link to a more serene and authentic past, had left him alone, unable to face a world that seemed to be slipping away from him. He continued to seek refuge in technology, looking for distractions in every corner, but now he realized that he was simply avoiding confronting himself. It was right then, on the way home from the funeral, that he decided to unplug. He started by turning off his phone, a little personal challenge. He wanted to see what would happen if he took a break, if he tried to let go of all the noise around him. The first day, the silence was unbearable. Every now and then, his hand would go to his pocket, looking for his phone to check the notifications, but there was nothing. The first few hours were a struggle with the anxiety that had been creeping into him for years. But then, walking through the deserted streets of the evening, he noticed a sound he hadn't heard in a long time: the wind. He stopped, closed his eyes, and breathed deeply. For the first time, he felt present. Have you ever tried a tech detox? Tell us about your experience in the comments. While his tech detox continued, Marco decided to take a whole week off. Every morning he got up without an alarm clock, opened the windows, and let in natural light. He ate breakfast without his phone next to him, listening only to the sounds of the city slowly waking up. One day, walking aimlessly, he found himself in an old, neglected park, a corner of green that seemed to have been forgotten by the frenzy of the city. The benches were ruined by time, the grass grew wild, and yet there was something magical about that place. Marco sat on a bench and stayed there for hours, watching the trees move gently in the wind, the children playing, and feeling, for the first time, a sense of peace. As the days passed, Marco began to notice how much he had changed. Little things he had previously ignored now had a new meaning: the coffee he made in the morning, the smell of wet grass, the sound of falling leaves. The park became his refuge, a place where he could simply exist without having to answer to anyone, without having to constantly be present in a digital world that seemed to devour him. Every time he returned there, he felt lighter, as if he were slowly finding himself again. Sometimes you just have to stop and listen. What is your refuge? Write it in the comments. But not everyone understood his decision. Andrea, an old friend, couldn't understand why Marco had chosen to disconnect. "What are you doing, isolating yourself from the world?" he said to him one evening while they were sipping a beer together. Andrea was a typical modern city man, always connected, always busy answering emails and messages, as if his life depended on how fast he managed everything. "You don't realize how much you're missing out on," Marco retorted, trying to explain the feeling of lightness he felt. But Andrea didn't want to understand. He was too immersed in his digital world to see that. While he was running faster and faster, Marco was discovering a new kind of freedom. As time passed, Marco began to reflect on how his life had changed, thanks to that simple act of turning off his phone. Grieving for the loss of his mother had led him to confront silence, and in silence he had found something precious: himself. However, he knew that his journey was not over yet. He decided not to return to his old life, but to create a new balance where technology was a tool and not a master. And here was the crucial moment. Marco had found true freedom, a freedom that is not achieved by running away, but by facing silence. One day, returning to his refuge park, he saw a small group of people gathered near the fountain. Curious, he approached and realized that they were talking about urban meditation. They were people like him, tired of the frenzy, looking for a way to reconnect with themselves in the heart of the city. He began to attend those meetings and discovered how powerful it was to share his journey with others. Each of them brought a different story. Some had lost their job, some were facing a family crisis, some were simply exhausted. Yet together, they found a sense of peace. Marco didn't just participate. Over time, he began to lead the groups himself. He taught people to unplug, to take time for themselves, to create moments of silence even in the most chaotic days. They didn't have to turn everything off forever, but learn to manage the flow of information consciously. What had initially been a personal experiment became a mission, to help others discover that true serenity wasn't found far away, on an isolated mountain, but right there, in the heart of the city, if only they learned to look. His technological detox was no longer a simple break from the digital world. It had become a new way of living. Marco had not only rediscovered himself, but he had found a way to help others do the same. His personal journey had become a shared path, and in doing so, he had transformed silence into a powerful form of connection, not only with himself, but with the world around him. You too can find this kind of serenity, wherever you are. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on other ideas on how to live mindfully. And so, in the heart of Milan, between the din of the city and the silence of its hidden corners, Marco had found the key to serenity. There was no need to escape, to isolate himself, to seek remote places. True peace was found in the way he chose to live, day after day, moment after moment, aware and present in every breath, every step, every heartbeat.